He looked at me and said quietly, "You don't always have to hold it together." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I'm Diana, 45, a wife, a stepmother, and that night, for the first time in a long while, I felt seen in my own home. The storm knocked out the power, and Liam brought me a glass of wine. We sat in silence, each lost in thought, until he gently asked, "Are you okay?" One that reminded me how long it had been since anyone noticed how I was really doing. What would you do if the person who made you feel most understood was someone you never expected? Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt unexpectedly seen in a way that stirred something inside you? I used to think that as long as I worked hard and provided for my family, that was enough. My wife, Diana, was gentle, thoughtful, and never one to complain. For more than 10 years of marriage, she was the quiet one who held everything together, never asking for much. And I got so used to her silence, I mistook it for contentment. Our home lacked nothing except for real time spent together. My job demanded constant travel, endless meetings, and emails sent long past midnight. I knew Diana was lonely. Sometimes I'd see her sitting by the window, staring quietly at the backyard for what felt like hours. But when I asked, she'd just smile and say, "I'm okay." And like a fool, I believed her. We weren't close anymore. The intimacy we once shared had been replaced with rushed goodnights and separate routines. I left early, came home late. Dinner became a lonely ritual. She still cooked for me, but I rarely sat down with her. Eventually, I even stopped asking if she'd eaten, or how her day was, or if she was tired. The silence between us thickened with time, but I didn't truly notice. I told myself things were fine, that we were just going through a quiet phase in our marriage. Didn't that happen to everyone? That's how I comforted myself every time something didn't feel right. I remember one birthday, hers, I sent a gift through a courier because I was attending a conference. It was an expensive silk scarf, no card, no note. She texted back, "Thank you. It's beautiful." But I still remember the forced smile on her face when we video called that night. There was something missing in her eyes, something that had quietly faded, and I didn't know how to bring it back. I kept thinking she was the patient one, the steady, loyal wife who would always wait. I believed she'd never leave, but I forgot even the quietest hearts still want to be heard. And I hadn't really listened in a long time. When I told her I'd be gone for another month-long business trip, she simply nodded. No questions, no sadness. I felt relieved, grateful even, for how understanding she always was. But now, looking back, I realized she wasn't understanding. She had already let go. I lived inside a marriage where I was the one who went missing. My body was home, sure, but my mind, always chasing deadlines, achievements, everything out there. Meanwhile, the woman who once held my hand through every hardship was slowly fading right in front of me. And I didn't see it, not until things began to change in ways I never saw coming. I came home earlier than expected. The business trip had been cut short due to a last-minute meeting cancellation. I should have felt relieved, maybe even happy to have more time with my wife. But strangely, as the taxi pulled up to the gate, I hesitated. Our house stood there, familiar and still, peaceful as always. And yet, something made me pause before opening the door. Deanna was in the kitchen, her back to me, the soft sound of water running in the sink. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. She still kept that habit of simmering cinnamon and apple in the afternoons, a small, gentle routine I used to love and eventually forgot. She turned as I stepped inside, her eyes freezing for a second, then softening into a faint, polite smile. "You're back," she said, her tone calm. I nodded. "Yeah, meeting got postponed, came back earlier than planned." There was no hug, no rush of questions like there used to be, just a strange, suspended silence between two people who had once been everything to each other. I sat at the dining table. She poured me a cup of tea, her movements careful, deliberate, but I noticed her hands didn't tremble anymore from anticipation. She didn't ask about my work, my health, or even the little things she used to care about so instinctively. When I asked how things had been the past few weeks, she kept it brief. The lavender in the yard had bloomed. There was a termite problem in the west fence. And, oh, Liam was home for a few days, she added, like she was mentioning a passing shower in the afternoon. Liam, my son from a previous marriage, the boy Diana had helped raise since he was 13. Now, 22. Tall, composed, with eyes that looked a lot like his mother's. I was glad he'd come back to visit. But after she said it, something settled uneasily in me. Not suspicion exactly, just something out of rhythm. That evening, I saw Deanna and Liam sitting on the sofa. She was laughing, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't seen on her face in so long, I had almost forgotten it. Liam was telling her stories about college, friends, occasionally leaning over to whisper something that made her giggle. They weren't doing anything wrong, of course not. But I stood there in the shadows behind the slightly open door, and for the first time in my life, I wondered, was I still part of her world? I wasn't jealous, I'm not that irrational, but I felt like an outsider watching two souls quietly connect in a way I'd somehow forgotten how to. That night, lying beside her, I listened to the sound of her steady breathing while I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. A quiet dread crept through me. If someone had stepped into the space I'd left empty for too long, would there still be a way back for me? Some things don't need to be said out loud. You feel them in a glance, in an unusual silence, in the subtle changes no outsider would ever notice. I started to realize Diana wasn't the same. Not because she had changed drastically, but because she had begun living a part of her life I could no longer reach. She would often stare out into the yard, tea in hand, not drinking. Sometimes she'd smile faintly at her phone, and when I called her name, she still answered, gently, patiently, but there were moments I could sense her pulling herself out of some other place in her mind just to come back to me. I tried doing the things I'd neglected for years, asking her to take walks, eating dinner without my laptop nearby, telling her about work with more than a quick summary. But the more I tried, the clearer the distance became. Diana still nodded and smiled, but it wasn't the same eager warmth from before. It felt like she was a polite guest at the dinner table, her body still seated, but her spirit had quietly excused itself long ago. Then one day I came home early without warning. It was drizzling outside, and I entered through the back to avoid tracking mud across the floors. From the living room, I heard laughter, Diana's laughter, but not the composed, restrained kind I'd grown used to. It was lighter, freer, the kind of laugh that slips out when someone stirs something deep and tender in your heart. I froze. Yeah. His voice was low and calm, telling a story that made Diana smile for a long time. I didn't walk in right away. I stood just beyond the wall, watching them on the sofa. She tilted her head slightly toward him, her expression soft, her lips moving like she didn't want to disturb something fragile. And Liam looked at her with a depth I hadn't seen before, concerned, maybe protective. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wanted to believe I was overthinking it, that their closeness was just the result of the distance I'd created between Deanna and myself, that things would be okay if I just kept trying, but deep down, I knew something was happening, and it was no longer in my control. The next morning, I saw Liam packing his bags. Spring break was coming to an end. He shook my hand and said, "Thanks, Dad, for always giving me a place to come home to." I nodded, forcing myself to stay composed. But when his eyes moved slowly, deliberately toward Diana with a look full of unspoken meaning, I knew. Something between them had crossed a line. Diana didn't look back at me as Liam walked out the door. She stared ahead, silent for a long time. No tears, no dramatic gestures. But the woman standing there, the one who used to belong to me, had left her heart somewhere I could no longer reach. And I stood there not knowing what to regret more. That I left her lonely for so many years? Or that I might be too late to bring her back? I let a few days pass after Liam left, partly because I didn't know where to begin, and partly because I kept asking myself, if I could already feel something had fractured between Diana and me, did I have the courage to face it? We continued on as usual, eating breakfast together, exchanging a few scattered words throughout the day. But neither of us spoke about what truly sat in the space between us. On Thursday night after dinner, I asked Deanna to sit with me on the couch. No TV, no phones, just the two of us. For the first time in what felt like ages, looking at each other without looking away. Diana, I started, my voice rough. We've lived in silence long enough. I need to ask you something. She didn't flinch, just nodded gently, eyes lowered to her fingers laced together in her lap. Between you and Liam, did something happen? I didn't ask with anger. I asked with the voice of a man who feared he was losing the most important thing in his life. Deanna looked up, her eyes held no panic, just exhaustion, and maybe a trace of relief, like she no longer had to keep something buried. Nothing happened, she said slowly. But Tom, some things don't need to be touched to break every boundary. I clenched my hands on my knees. Do you love him? She shook her head. No, I don't love Liam, but I let myself feel seen again, felt something I haven't felt in this marriage for a very long time. I'm sorry, I whispered. I left you alone for too long, didn't I? She didn't respond right away. Then she inhaled, shaky and deep. I waited for a gentle touch, a timely question, a look that truly saw me. For years, I never meant to betray you. But when Liam came along and he noticed me, not like a son, like someone who saw I'd become invisible to myself, I was weaker than I thought. The room was so still I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I asked if you could go back, would you stop it? She met my eyes. Yes, but not because I didn't want to feel it, because I didn't want to lose you. I nodded. No tears, no accusations. Just a quiet truth between two people who had drifted too far apart. I reached for her hand. It felt strange, like holding the hand of someone both familiar and unfamiliar. We need to learn how to love each other again, I said, if you still want that. Deanna didn't answer right away, but this time she gripped my hand tightly. And maybe for people who've once lost each other, sitting down and speaking the truth is already the first step toward forgiveness. We go back to how things used to be after that night. Honestly, I don't think there's such a thing as going back anymore. But something did change, and that was the silence between us. For the first time in a long time, it finally broke. The next morning, when I woke up, Deanna was in the kitchen making coffee. Morning light spilled across her hair, casting a quiet calm over the room. It wasn't peaceful because everything had been forgiven. It was peaceful because, at the very least, everything had finally been acknowledged. I walked over and gently touched her back. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She turned, looked at me, and handed me the first cup of coffee. It was a small gesture, but in that moment I knew she was still here. We started doing small things together again, not out of obligation, but because we wanted to try. I invited her to take walks with me in the evenings, like we used to when we first got married. At first, our steps were awkward, our words cautious, but eventually we laughed. Diana signed up for a morning yoga class at the local center. I was surprised the first time I saw her in workout clothes, hair pulled up, face slightly tired but glowing. She said, I need to relearn how to take care of myself. I understood, and for the first time, instead of feeling pushed out, I realized I needed to learn that with her, to care for her without trying to keep her like a responsibility. One weekend, we reorganized our bedroom, not because we were trying to forget what happened, but because we wanted to create a new beginning. I suggested we get a new mattress, and Deanna laughed. Sure, it's not just for your back and not to erase the past. I laughed too, but deep down I knew it was both. One night after doing the dishes, I told her, I think I got too used to believing you'd always be there, always understanding, always waiting. And because of that, I forgot you needed to be seen too. Diana stayed quiet for a while, then said, I didn't say anything sooner either. I thought I was being strong, but really, I was just shrinking a little more each day. We held each other there in the kitchen, between the soft hum of the dishwasher and the ticking of the wall clock. Nothing dramatic, just two people learning to be honest, gentle, and to walk toward each other again. A few weeks later, I wrote Deanna a letter, handwritten. I slipped it into the drawer of her vanity. I didn't write another apology. Instead, I told her about the first time I saw her in that white dress on the beach and how that feeling had never really gone away. She read it, then pinned it to the fridge with a tiny heart shaped magnet. That was her reply. I don't know what the future will look like. I'm not sure we'll fix every crack, but I know that ever since that night, when we looked each other in the eye and chose to speak the truth, our marriage began a new chapter. One where love isn't about possession, it's about choosing to stay, choosing to reach for each other one day at a time. The month that followed passed like a quiet season. There were no grand promises, no dramatic displays of full forgiveness, but between simple dinners, movie nights curled up together, and early mornings where we poured each other coffee, something began to grow back, like a green shoot pushing through after a long, hard storm. Diane and I stopped trying to go back to how things were. Maybe the most painful truth in a long marriage is realizing that before wasn't as perfect as we thought. We didn't need to start over from the beginning. We needed to start from here. One rainy afternoon, I asked her to go for a walk, sharing a single umbrella. Sometimes words weren't necessary, just walking beside each other was enough. Diana told me about her first yoga class, how she felt awkward surrounded by younger, stronger women. I didn't interrupt, I just held her hand a little tighter. She turned to me, eyes slightly glazed with tears. I thought I had no value anymore, to the world, to you. I stopped and squeezed her hand. You didn't fade, Diana, you disappeared, but not because of you, because I wasn't paying enough attention to hold on to you when you started slipping. After that day, I began writing her a small note each week, nothing long, just a few lines. Something I noticed. You look so confident reading on the balcony today. Or I love the way you smile when you talk to the neighbor. It makes the whole block feel warmer. She never said much about them, but she kept every single note, folded neatly in a small box on her nightstand. That early summer, we took a weekend trip, just the two of us, no itinerary, no phones. Sitting by the creek, Diana leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." And I said, "Thank you for staying, even when I made you feel alone in the one place that was supposed to be your home." When we got back, I started asking the questions I once avoided. How you feeling today? What made you smile? Or sometimes simply, what can I do to help you feel more love? Deanna changed too. She stopped hiding her emotions. When she was sad, she said it. When she needed a hug, she came closer. When something hurt her, she didn't bury it in silence. And I learned not to defend myself, but to listen. Healing wasn't a finish line, it was a journey, repeated again and again, of choosing each other, understanding each other, and then choosing each other all over again. Maybe we'll never be perfect by old standards, but now every small touch, every glance that lingers a little longer, every unprompted hug is proof that our marriage didn't break, it's just being rewritten with honesty, with tenderness, and with relentless commitment. Not to go back to what we were, but to truly rediscover who we are now. This time, leaving no cracks ignored. Some love stories don't end with tears or betrayal. They end in silence. In the quiet, creeping distance of two people living side by side without really seeing each other anymore. Diana and Tom's story isn't a tragedy. It's a reminder that marriage doesn't sustain itself just because two people once fell in love. It has to be nurtured, listened to, renewed, not with expensive gifts or grand gestures, but through true presence. In the smallest, everyday moments, maybe you've felt invisible in your own home. Maybe you've carried emotions you can't quite name, desires to be understood that make you feel guilty for even having them. But you're not wrong. Feelings are never the enemy. It's the denial of them that leads us astray. If you've ever found yourself in Deanna's shoes or even in Tom's, please remember what matters most isn't who's right or wrong, but whether both of you are still willing to relearn how to truly see each other. Have you ever experienced that feeling of being close but worlds apart from your partner? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story, every honest reflection can become a lifeline for someone's walking a similar path. If this story spoke to something inside you, don't hesitate to leave a comment, drop an emoji, or send it to someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for staying with us until the end. There is still so much more to share, to listen to, and to heal together.